Hey there! It's been so long since I did a Jane Eyre video that this almost feels awkward. I apologize for the long wait. I said I was going to do this several months ago, but I ended up not getting to it until now. Sorry about that. Today I'd like to share a few thoughts on a BBC radio adaptation of Jane Eyre that aired originally in 1994. I was able to download it from a wonderful site, The Enthusiast's Guide to Jane Eyre, which is a great resource for a lot of lesser-known Jane Eyre adaptations, and just a great resource for fans in general. So I've put a link in the description to that site for anyone who'd like to check this out. This adaptation stars Sophie Thompson as Jane Eyre and Ciarán Hinds as Mr. Rochester. Sophie Thompson we know from a number of films. There was a while there where she seemed to pop up in everything we watched. I did not know that she was Emma Thompson's sister, found that out just last week. Ciarán Hinds, of course, I've also seen in a lot of things. They're both in the 1995 version of Persuasion. He plays the hero, and Sophie Thompson plays the heroine's sister. But more important to this discussion, Hinds also played Rochester on screen opposite Samantha Morton in the 1997 version of Jane Eyre. And that is the main reason why I wanted to listen to this radio show. The 1997 version is... it's hit and miss. I have discussed its pros and cons pretty thoroughly in my adaptation comparison series, and this isn't the time or place to rehash all that. Specifically, there were things I liked about Ciarán Hinds' portrayal of Rochester and things I didn't like, and ever since I heard about this radio show, I've wondered how his performance would compare, being audio only, working from a different script, opposite a different actress. It actually makes for a pretty interesting case study, I think, on acting. So this radio program was adapted from Charlotte Bronte's novel by Micheline Wander, and it's split into 4 parts: Jane the Child, Jane the Governess, Jane the Fugitive, and Jane the Wife. In a nutshell, I liked this adaptation. I especially enjoyed the second half. On the whole, it sticks close to the book, though, of course, it makes minor changes for the sake of time or for artistic interpretation. It's got strong ambiance, dialing up the novel's spooky gothic elements. This is evident right from the start when young Jane is put in the Red Room, and then throughout the program there are ghostly voices murmuring her name and echoing her words, and as the story progresses, these echoes become concentrated in one individual who, in the first half, is credited as the woman's voice and is played by Vivian Rochester. I had to laugh when I heard the credits. That is really her name. Both leads do an equally fine job. Hinds' performance is pretty much what I was hoping for. It is toned down from what it is in the 97 film, but he's still himself, and Thompson gets to explore many facets of Jane's character, and it should be noted that she's one of the few actresses who have played both adult Jane and young Jane. My one critique is that Thompson's Jane is more prone to tears than I expect. Jane Eyre is an emotional story, but the character herself, in my estimation, isn't a huge crier. She's more likely to keep her feelings concealed until they reach a breaking point, and then they escape in a passionate rush. So, if it seems like she's on the verge of bursting into tears too frequently, that feels excessive to me. But it all balances out here, and I also appreciate the smooth inclusion of Jane's inner musings. It's easier to manage this in an audio adaptation as opposed to a visual adaptation, where it's hard to make the switch to a lengthy voiceover monologue seem natural. Those are my general thoughts, and I could end the review here, but I figure some of you might be interested in hearing more specific comments on each episode, and I did take a couple pages of notes, so here you go. Episode 1 focuses on Jane's childhood and portrays her as a little girl full of hatred and fear, or hatred fueled by fear and loneliness. Brocklehurst is voiced by Julian Glover, who, besides the leads, was the only name I recognized among the cast. We make the transition from Gateshead to Lowood School around the 30-minute mark, which seems fair compared to the miniseries adaptations. That seems to be just the right amount of time, 30 minutes. Miss Temple assigns Helen Burns to look after Jane right away, and she's a very nice Helen, kind and motherly. Both she and Miss Temple are portrayed as the maternal figures that Jane has not really encountered before. The first meeting with Rochester, the horse scene, is quick and brusque, so the first impression is that Hinds' Rochester is going to be exactly the same here as he is in the film. The first conversation happens immediately after, and things move fairly quickly, like a rapid-fire interrogation. But Rochester, though direct, is not unpleasant. So this is where you start to realize, okay, Hinds is playing it cooler here. He's not barking at Jane. Jane tells Mrs. Fairfax after this strange interview that she doesn't like him, which made me laugh, but afterwards she says to herself that his face haunted her dreams that night. Episode 2 starts with the second conversation, introducing humor with Rochester's half-hearted attempt to appease his new employee by being more polite, and for her part, Jane confidently speaks up and contradicts him when she feels it's necessary, but she doesn't come across as impudent or speaking above her station. They even share a little chuckle, and we're starting to develop that rapport, that banter that I like. The fire scene is a little funny. Based on dialogue and sound effects, it seems like the fire's already out when Jane comes to the rescue. Rochester complains about the water that she's dumped all over him and dumped all over the carpet, but there's nothing said about flames or Jane trying to douse them. It's almost like a line or two got skipped over. The guests come, we meet Blanche Ingram briefly. She sounds older than your average Blanche, and yes, the character is supposed to be older than Jane and approaching the shelf, but she sounded remarkably older. Otherwise, there's not much time spent on individual members of the party. You don't have quite the excruciating mortification of other versions where Jane has to sit there and listen to abusive talk about governesses when she's right there in the room. There's a little bit of that, but not a whole lot. Jane exits the room before Rochester starts singing, and I think I recall a similar cutaway in the 97 film. Although I should point out, I don't believe that the 97 film and this adaptation have anything to do with each other besides the same male star. Rochester puts Blanche on hold to go after Jane, and Thompson plays this section on the stairs breathless, melancholy, and vulnerable, but also indignant. And I think it's good to have that little edge in there. There is a gypsy scene, surprise, surprise. The gypsy demands to see the governess first, which is a change. There's no other telling off of the other young ladies, which is interesting because, well, that was partly the point of the whole disguise. He wanted to talk to Jane in a more unprofessional way and probe her feelings, but he also wanted to take the opportunity to scare off Blanche and make fun of some of his other guests. But anyway, it's obviously Rochester. The disguise is pretty thin. It's not clear whether Jane was fooled at all, but she outs him quickly and angrily after the gypsy tells her that Rochester and Blanche are going to get married and they'll be happy. Mason, check. Sick Mrs. Reed, check. The spooky whispering is magnified as Jane returns to the house where she spent such a miserable youth. Uncle's letter, check. Grown-up cousins, not check, because something's gotta give. Jane returns to Thornfield and is greeted by Rochester in a nice little moment. When he first sees her, we hear him murmur her name softly, and then he collects himself and resumes his professional posture and his whole act, the charade. The second episode ends with a sort of cliffhanger, the characters entering what we know is the proposal scene. Episode 3 picks up right where 2 left off, and my feelings about this proposal are mixed. Like I said, Hinds is still Hinds with his way of speaking and his occasional forcefulness, and I still don't view his interpretation of the character as my personal ideal. Also, since we can't see, we have to infer some activities here. Talking about the kissing, that wasn't supposed to sound weird. You know what's happening when there's a sudden silence, and the way they battle this out, him trying to persuade her and her starting to give in and then protesting, I'm not crazy about. It's close to the book, but it's just not how I've always pictured it in the book. So there's that. But for me, it all turns around at the line,
You strange, you almost unearthly thing.
I like Hinds' reading there, and then the atmosphere cranks up. It sounds cold, and there's huge thunder and that mysterious laughter. Then we enter the engagement period, and I think this is where it really starts to take off.
We will talk more at dinner.
No, sir. I never have dined with you, and I see no reason why I should now. Till
what?
Till I can't help it.
Oh, do you suppose I eat like an ogre that you dread being the companion of my repast?
Confident Jane Eyre is like a new person, with lightness exploding out of her. Thompson and Hinds show some splendid chemistry here. The dialogue is funny, and their interplay is charming. I wrote in my notes that this conversation is my favorite part of the show. Yes, this is what I look for.
Indeed, begging your pardon, sir, I shall not. I shall go on with it as usual. I shall keep out of your way all day, as I have been accustomed to, and you may send for me in the evening, and I'll come then, but at no other time.
Well, I see I have no choice.
Yet Thompson is also channeling Jane's growing anxiety. There's extra time spent on Jane's dream and her mental disturbance, and there's an alarming part, this was an addition, where she tries on her wedding dress, but as the voices crescendo, the dress starts to burn her and she takes it off in a panic. It's very different, but very interesting. Both the wedding and the scene that immediately follows it, where we finally meet Bertha, are well done, well acted, and well produced. They're definitely making a statement about the two women with the words they choose to have Bertha repeat: nothing, ice, love, child. These are her somber echoes to Jane's heartbroken monologue. 10 seconds in, the post-wedding scene between Jane and Rochester is already 100 times better than it was in the 1997 film. That's one of the worst scenes in that version. Rochester is borderline violent, and he's insulting, and it's repellent. The scene is done right here, and hearing what Hinds was given the opportunity to do, and how he nails such key material, some of the characters' most important and emotional speeches, I feel like he was robbed. The 1997 version messed this part up in a big way, and I know there are Jane Eyre fans who intensely dislike Hinds' portrayal of Rochester specifically because of this scene in that movie. But the fault, I believe, is the scripts and the directors, not the actors. Because given the right material, he delivers. It's the moving scene that it's supposed to be. And I dare say one of the more emotional takes on this conversation. You're supposed to feel gutted for both of these characters and understand why it's so difficult for Jane to choose to leave. You're not supposed to feel like, oh, yikes, Jane, you gotta get out of there before he murders you. There is one odd change they made where Jane doesn't leave right away. She goes back to her room and goes to bed and has a nightmare about Jane Rochester and then leaves early the next morning. It came as no surprise to me that Jane's wanderings were abridged. Likewise, there's only one Rivers sister, Diana, instead of two, and that's something that several adaptations have done just to condense things a little bit. As the fourth and final episode begins, spoilers by the way, I'm sure it's fine. Who's watching this whole video that doesn't already know the story of Jane Eyre? I appreciate how this adaptation covers all the bases, but keeps things moving. We jump forward a bit to Jane as a schoolmistress, wondering about the life she gave up, and longing for love. This St. John Rivers sounds nice enough. He's not as stern or sour as some are. He laughs a little bit at one point, which is, hey. Rosamund Oliver, check. Jane writing her real name on Rosamund's portrait and St. John taking it, check. Jane's inheritance, check. Discovery that they're cousins, check. St. John and Jane have some interesting conversation on the topic of marriage. And then there's another thing, which is really a small thing tossed in there, but to me it was like, whoa, what is this? They're studying Hindustani together, and they get kind of close to each other, and he kisses her. What? What was that? No. Despite that, it is very clear that he does not love her. And I like the way St. John's proposal is handled. It's not done in a hasty, let's hurry up and get this part over with way. The part with Rochester's voice is a little funny, perhaps because it's supposed to be this disembodied call, but in an audio adaptation, they're all disembodied voices. Plus he sounds a bit, I don't know. I would have gone for a different reading of that line, let's put it that way. In addition, they have St. John and Rochester and Bertha and Jane speaking over each other in this climactic moment. So it gets a little unclear. It's not unclear in the sense that it's confusing and you can't understand what's going on, but it's cacophonous. So Jane goes back, sees the house, learns what happened at the inn, goes to Ferndean, is met at the door by Mrs. Fairfax, so she's still hanging around. It's the only change there. And I've got to say, the audio-only versions are never as good as the filmed ones for the reunion moment. I want to see all those changing expressions on his face. And yes, I am aware that that there's some irony there, given the circumstances. Throughout this last part, as Jane and Rochester patch things up, the dialogue maintains its easy, natural pace. Right away, they slide back into the familiar rapport, with Jane's breezy teasing and her added comment that it's so good to hear you laugh, which is nice. And there is laughter, and I don't know, that just gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. They wrap things up with other characters' reactions to the marriage and Rochester's sight returning. So all in all, I was quite pleased with this version of Jane Eyre, and as radio adaptations go, it's better than the older versions I've listened to. That's easy. They're all pretty short and truncated. I might have liked this one better than the more recent one from 2011, but I'm not sure it surpasses the 1972 one. I liked that a lot. Those are my thoughts on the 1994 BBC radio adaptation of Jane Eyre. And if anybody was wondering, yes, I did color while listening to this. Here's my beauteous artwork. I don't even like coloring. Unlike a lot of people, I don't find it relaxing. But it's tradition. I hope you enjoyed this video. I do have a few other Jane Eyre related things that I want to cover, but since it took me so long to get to this, I don't want to get your hopes up because I can't guarantee that that will be happening very soon. But these things are on the to-do list, and they're always in the back of my mind, just waiting for the right opportunity. So stick around, because you never know what's around the corner. Thanks for watching.